Ready? All right, already. $187,000 for this table and his microphone doesn't work? Sorry, Dr. Farr. Sorry. Fix the sound. Yes. Yes. It's like me, it's very sensitive. We're going to start on time. Please, everyone, have your seats.
Welcome, welcome, welcome. Dr. Ferrari, we want to have a seat, please. And let me go, first of all, let me welcome you all and thank you for coming to participate in this forum, this roundtable, if you will. This is a roundtable to discuss an incredibly important criminal justice issue, isolated confinement. I expect that, and Senator Greenstein, who's on my left, are there any of the Assembly people here who are the Assembly sponsors? Oh, I'm sorry. Sorry, my bad. Our Assembly sponsors here as well are our legislation to oversee and to limit the use of isolated confinement only to circumstances when it's absolutely necessary. And we will hear testimony from folks here who have personal experience, like Commissioner Carrick and others, people in the field, in the criminal justice field, in the mental health field, to talk about what the abuse and overuse of isolated confinement does and how it oftentimes results in the release from prison, and most people in prison are released into society, how it results in them being damaged psychologically, physically, emotionally damaged, and that certainly mitigates against any successful reentry into society, and certainly does not protect the public. Indeed, it actually results in harming the public. I just want to make one other generic statement. This is such a formidable group. I will be in touch with you on other criminal justice reform issues because I believe I know our criminal justice reform, our criminal justice system in America needs a total overhaul from top to bottom. We've heard this statistic over and over and over again, but it's worth repeating that we incarcerate in America more of our residents per population than any country in the world. It's costly and it's counterproductive. Indeed, I just want to mention one issue here. It just came up, Senator. I got notice that the governor is appointing someone to the parole board, whom I have senatorial courtesy over. And someone had an objection to that, and I said, don't worry about it, because I'd like to cut the parole board by 2/3. Because the only thing the parole board does is push around paper, keep people in prison who should be out of prison, earning a living, in the community. So that's another issue, and I know there are many. Again, sorry for rambling, but let me just mention one other thing. New Jersey has done a pretty good job in terms of criminal justice reform, in terms of expanding eligibility for drug court in lieu of imprisonment, in terms of breaking down the barriers to employment. There are many other issues. Senator Greenstein and I and the Assemblywomen are involved in terms of removing more barriers to employment, because we know that an ex-offender who has the doors to employment slammed in his or her face, they're not going to be an ex-offender for long. They're going to be repeat offenders. So I'm preaching to the choir here, but we're here to gather the information necessary to move this bill forward It will move first in Senator Greenstein's committee. So I want to first introduce our host today, and I want to thank not only President Dawood Ferrari, but Kean University and Shane Darris, my former legislative aide, for putting this very formidable group together. Dr. Ferrari?
Thank you.
Don't touch the microphone. All right.
Thank you all for coming, and welcome to Kean University. It's the most appropriate place to do things like that. We have done other events, including the heroin addiction problem in New Jersey here, and many others. So I hope you enjoy your stay here at Kean. It's an important issue, a very important issue, and it directly connects to education in the long run too. So welcome, and thank you for choosing Kean to do this.
Well, thank you actually for inviting us. I will just go over the agenda. I will ask everyone, including myself, to be brief because we have a lot of people to hear from. We intend to finish at 1 p.m. and then we will have lunch for everyone. And prior to that, we will stop about 20 minutes or so for those folks who are not on the agenda to participate and ask questions or make statements. We will first hear from Senator Greenstein, and then our Assemblywoman Nancy Pinkin, Assemblyman Jamel Holly, if he ever gets here. Jamel's not here, right? He will. And our Executive Director of the ACLU of New Jersey, Alex Shalom, and of course Bernie Kerrick, former New York City Police Commissioner, Elizabeth Turchi, Director of Kean University Human Rights Institute. And then, while not on the agenda, we will go around. We'll flip a coin whether we go right or left to see which way, and make sure that everyone has an opportunity to be heard. When it's your turn, please just identify yourself and your position. So we will start with Senator Greenstein.
Thank you very much, Senator Lesniak. What we're here to do today is to begin the process of opening up an institution that's traditionally closed. And when I say an institution, I mean the entire correctional system. It's a place that most of us don't have the chance to visit. We're happy about that, at least as residents. And it's a place that most people want to sort of push away and say, we don't need to know about this. But unfortunately, sometimes some bad things are going on in there, and we need to open the doors and shine the light and take a look at what's actually happening. We had a hearing, just a hearing without a vote, on Senator Lesniak's bill in my committee, the Law and Public Safety Committee. And one of the things that I found very interesting, but at the end of the meeting we still didn't have all the answers, maybe we'll get some more today, is that there are so many kinds of isolated confinement. Now, the ones that make more sense to me are the ones that are definitely limited in time, they're for a specific purpose, you move on to something else beyond that. The ones where somebody can be put in for very long periods of time without a real limit, and we heard mixed information on that during the meeting, and we need to really get to the bottom of that. Is that true here in New Jersey? We certainly heard from people who said they experienced it. We also heard from people in the criminal justice system who told us that really doesn't happen. One thing that is very important to me is that the staff in the prisons is protected, the guards, the others who are actually working in there. I want to make certain that whatever tools they need to do their job so that they're protected are still preserved. And I think that can be done without having a system in place where it seems like people may almost be tortured, and we certainly don't want to have torture going on in our prisons. But when you put somebody in for a very long period or an unlimited period, and they're not really having much contact with other people, that can certainly be or border on torture, and I'm sure none of us want that to happen. Just to read off a couple that happens that we talked about in our hearing: temporary close custody, pre-hearing detention, protective custody, disciplinary detention, administrative segregation, management control unit. We heard about all of those. Some of them have limits, some of them don't really seem to. And that's what I think we need to get to the bottom of, and what I very much appreciate in the legislation is the idea of making sure that mentally ill people are not subjected to this. This clearly shouldn't be happening. And that is one of the areas that I feel very strongly about. So that's my starting place for today. Thank you.
Thank you, Senator. And of course, we also very much are concerned with juveniles as well in that category. Assemblywoman Pinkham? That's yours. There you go.
Well, I'm Assemblywoman Nancy Pinkin, and I thank Senator Lesniak for championing this issue. He's certainly been a leader in many extremely difficult issues, certainly in the death penalty. And this issue is something that it's not just normally a piece of legislation like we might take on, but it's something that requires a great deal of study and consideration and will be an evolving change and somewhat, I think, academic in finding how we change the cycle. Things in systems of government are cyclical, and we realize that we went through a period where we said, 3 strikes, you're out, lock everybody up, put everybody in prison, and now we're saying, well, wait a minute now, where did we go with this? What are we doing with, as Senator Lesniak said, the people that are going to be going back into the community and really focusing on rehabilitation and changing the practices that we have. I think, as Senator Greenstein said, we need to weigh the issues in corrections and protecting the correctional officers, but also looking at focusing on wellness and recovery. I've spent many years being an advocate in the mental health community, so I think that there are a lot of issues between corrections and mental health that we need to look at, but we did have a period where we did not believe in wellness and recovery, and I think the same applies to corrections. So I'm here as a vehicle to try to consider the aspects of all of the involved parties, and I look forward to working with you to move this to another level. So again, thank you to Senator Lesniak for taking on this issue.
Thank you, Assemblywoman. Alex?
Senator Lesniak, Assemblywoman Pinkin, everyone, thanks for inviting me today. If you open the New York Times today on page 816, you would see an article about the movement to abolish solitary confinement. If you listened to the news last week, you would have heard President Obama ask whether it really made sense to lock people in small cells for 23 hours a day, whether that would make us safer, whether that would make us stronger, and when people are ultimately released, how are they going to adapt? And his conclusion was, it's not smart. And if you read the newspaper a month ago, you would have read conservative Supreme Court Justice Anthony Kennedy saying that the research confirms what the United States Supreme Court knew over a century ago. Years on end of near total isolation exact a terrible price. And Justice Kennedy then asked, and this is important, whether the court would soon have to determine whether prisons should be required to adopt alternatives to isolation. So the momentum is building, and certain things are inevitable. Soon, we will stop the practice of locking vulnerable people in small rooms for long periods of time, a practice that we know is extremely detrimental to mental health. Soon, we are going to end long-term isolation of prisoners, a practice that has been termed torture and we know is counterproductive to mental health and recovery. So the question is, how are we going to do that? And New Jersey might have been destined to follow the lead of other states and get there in 3 years, 5 years, 10 years, maybe wait until its taxpayers are forced to foot the bill for a dozen or more lawsuits talking about this issue. But instead, and as Assemblywoman Pinkin has mentioned, as has happened several times, Senator Lesniak is leading the way. And the bill here, and I think everyone at the table knows what the bill does, but the bill ends the use of solitary confinement for vulnerable populations like juveniles and the mentally ill. It permits the use of isolated confinement for other adults only when it's necessary and when lesser sanctions won't work to protect the people in prison and out of prison. And it limits the amount of time anyone can spend in solitary confinement because we know that the effects get more serious as time goes on. It also mandates public reporting. It does a lot of things, but at base what it does is it puts us out ahead of the curve. And it says, we see that the momentum for change is inevitable, and we are going to do what we can in New Jersey to make sure that New Jerseyans in prison and out of prison are safe and healthy and taxpayers aren't paying an unnecessary cost. I'm grateful to be part of this conversation where we will determine how, not if, New Jersey changes its use of solitary confinement.
Thank you, Alex. And now, Mr. Kerrick.
Good morning. First, I'd like to thank the Senator for the invitation to be here. And as I've been introduced as the police commissioner, former police commissioner of the city of New York, prior to that, I ran the New York City jail system. We took in 133,000 inmate admissions a year. Mark Cranston, who now runs Middlesex County Corrections, ran one of those facilities for me, ultimately became the first deputy commissioner. We took that agency from being one of the worst and most violent agencies to an international model for efficiency, accountability, and safety. Over the 6-7 years that I was there, we started out with 150 stabbings and slashings per month. We had a special housing unit that we built specifically for violence-prone prisoners, the worst of the worst, the people that lit people on fire, that beat them to a pulp, that slashed and stabbed them, that continued to throw urine and feces in the face of officers. And that's a population that you have to deal with in a facility, especially Rikers Island, something like that. But before I go on, I just want to read, for 2 minutes, I want to read you some passages from a book. Despair. The screams were blood-curdling. The young Hispanic prisoner's desperation echoed through the 9th floor of the special housing unit in the Metropolitan Correctional Center in Lower Manhattan. I listened from my solitary confinement cell just a few locked doors from the corridor. The young Hispanic inmate must have been lying on the floor of his cell as he yelled, kicking the base of the solid steel door, each blow sounding like a thundering explosion. I laid in my bed shivering, listening to the kid scream bloody murder. His cries echoed the strains I felt, the desperation, the despair, even the madness. I looked around at my own trap, my box, the hold, a cage. At most, that's what prisoners called them. A 12-by-8 solid steel box with a bed, a stainless steel sink, a toilet, a small metal writing table. I slipped into despair. You could see and feel the history of each cell, the burn marks where the prior inmates started fires, the personal notes written on the walls that documented the feelings of hopelessness and despair. Live with the pain. Be strong for those who are weak. Have faith. God loves you. I couldn't tell if it was the strain of isolation or the frigid cold that was making me shiver uncontrollably. Staring into the darkness, I found myself deeper in paranoia and anxiety, even hallucinating, talking to myself at times. These were the lowest moments of my life. Hopelessness and failure covered me. The mind-altering nature of prison, the deprivation of freedom intensified by solitary confinement, makes you say and do things that you would never otherwise do or think. I confess that I was pretty close to the edge. I remember thinking, how could I do this? End this simple emptiness and suffering. But how could I do it quickly enough so that the COs would not rush in and save me before it was over? Those are my words. That was me. I was in a solitary confinement cell in the federal prison system, not because I was one of those violent inmates I talked about, not because I had slashed or cut anyone, not because I threw feces or urine in the face of an officer, not because I beat anybody to a pulp or attempted to kill them, or I was a threat to national security. I was placed in solitary confinement, I was told, for protective custody. My solitary confinement was 23 hours a day with 1 hour optional recreation, and I can tell you truthfully that never happened. I had no contact with the outside world with the exception of one phone call per month to my family, 15 minutes. You had no contact with anyone. You weren't allowed books, real books. You received newspapers that were cut to shreds from other inmates who slipped them under your door. You're treated like an animal. You don't go to prison to be dehumanized. You're not supposed to be degraded. You're not supposed to be demoralized. Your freedom is taken from you as a part of your punishment, but that's where it's supposed to stop. The system is not supposed to punish you internally, and unfortunately, it does. And I say that from my own personal experience. I've run two of the largest law enforcement organizations in this country, and I had enormous success. And in the history of our country, in the entire history, no one, with my experience, my background, and my success in this field has ever lived on the inside as an inmate. And I can tell you, from my own personal experience, a unique perspective, a one-of-a-kind perspective, that the laws and the policies on solitary confinement have to be changed. And I will say, especially for the guys sitting on that side of the table, these men and the people they represent, they need special housing units. Let me be clear, they need special housing units. People that are a threat to an institution, a threat to escape, people that continue to cut and carve up other human beings, they need to be housed in a place where they can be controlled. But that doesn't mean you take away their medical conditions or their psychological services. They also have to be treated. But I can tell you, if we did not have a special housing unit at the time on Rikers Island, we wouldn't have had 150 stabbings and slashings per month. We would have had 1,000. There has to be, Senator Greenstein mentioned earlier the limits of time. Limits of time on going into solitary is extremely important, but I will say this, the justification for putting someone in solitary is equally, if not more important. People shouldn't be put in solitary confinement for protective custody. There's other alternative means of housing. You shouldn't be punished because you're being protected. You shouldn't be punished in this way, and this is cruel and unusual punishment. And I'll touch on this one last thing because I know the senator's putting together this bill. If there's any way in this bill that you could enhance the training that officers get on solitary confinement, that is probably one of the most important things you can do. And the reason being is, I will tell you, those guys have one of the most difficult jobs in the United States. It's an extremely difficult job. And they go through an enormous amount of training to do that job. But here's where the training in solitary confinement has to be different. The men and women that work in one of these units, they have to understand that the acting out and much of what happens, like that Spanish kid I talked about that I listened to over and over, screaming for somebody to get him out of that box, he wasn't acting out because he was an ass. He was acting out because he was losing his damn mind. That's what COs, many of them, don't understand. That part of training has to change. They have to understand the psychological impacts of solitary confinement. Senator, thank you for the invitation to be here, and I wish you all the best in changing what I believe is one of the most important issues in this country right now.
Well, thank you very much for your personal experience, both in law enforcement and as within the walls of prison. I'm very glad you brought up the corrections officers and their experience, because in addition to the training, I believe, without a doubt, they also need additional support. As sponsor of the legislation that abolished the death penalty in New Jersey, I am well aware of studies that show that corrections officers in death row have mental health issues as well, just because of the atmosphere of which that they are in their entire workday. That's not productive either to the officers as well, and we have to be concerned about their well-being. I appreciate you bringing that up.
Thank you, sir.
We will now hear from Elizabeth Turchi, the director of Kean University Human Rights Institution.
Hi, my name's Liz Turchi. I'm the director of Human Rights Institute here at Kean University, and I join President Farahi in welcoming all of you and extend my gratitude to the senator for the invitation. I'm an international human rights attorney, and my background is in international criminal justice. I'm here with Kean about 5 months. I served as legal advisor to the United Nations Assistant Secretary General in The Hague with 2 international criminal courts. The ICTY, International Criminal Tribunal for the former Yugoslavia, which prosecutes genocide and war crimes, and the Special Tribunal for Lebanon, which prosecutes international crimes of terrorism. And in this capacity, I drafted the court's rules of detention and ensured that the court's detention facility housing accused war criminals operated in lines with the highest international human rights standard for the treatment of detainees. The reason for this was to send the message to prisons around the globe that prisoners are humans too, and even convicted of crimes the world considers to be most serious and heinous, they need to be treated with human dignity. The Universal Declaration of Human Rights, adopted in 1948, drafted with the leadership of our very own Eleanor Roosevelt, provides human rights to all persons. And to achieve that universality means that criminals convicted of unimaginable brutality, genocide, mass murder, and torture, those who've tortured others themselves, are still entitled to human rights, human dignity, and to be free of torture and inhumane punishment. The international community considers prolonged solitary confinement to be torture, and the 8th Amendment of the US Constitution prohibits cruel and unusual punishment. I would say that we, as a society, if we are to hold sacred the human rights of all persons, then we must do so for prisoners, including criminals, and prolonged solitary confinement. I would just close by thanking all of you for giving your time and effort to the severity of this issue. Thank you very much.
Well, thank you. I think what we'll do now is starting after you, Alex, because we've already spoke. Oh, Jamel, you want to say a few words, Jamel? Only a few because you were late, so you only get a few words. No.
Thank you, Senator. I just want to commend you, Senator, for taking on this issue
Well,
along with your
continue
other
in that vein.
and my other colleagues in the legislature. Commissioner Currick, thank you for joining us here today. And Kean University. Senator, thank you for taking up this important issue. I'm here to be very supportive as a freshman legislator in the Assembly. This is an important issue, and thank you for rising this up to the level where it needs to be, because this is something that we need to begin to have that conversation and really resolve an issue that has been going on for so long. So I'm happy to be here, and thank you all for joining us. Welcome to our legislative district here in Union County, and we look forward to the dialogue as we continue this conversation today.
Thank you, Assemblyman. Now what I'd like to do is, if you would just all introduce yourself and state your organization, then we'll come back and have you all say a few words, but so that we can all get an idea of who's here.
My name is Jean Ross. I've been providing pro bono legal services for business for the last 13 years, and I am here as a member of the People's Organization for Progress. You'll see us in Newark on Saturday.
Thank you.
Dr. Patrick McManaman, Kean University's Criminal Justice Program. I am retired from corrections. I served in 2 states, Illinois and New Jersey.
August Poske. I'm an attorney for Disability Rights New Jersey, and I'm grateful to be here. Thank you for the invitation.
My name is Howard Thompson, and I'm a former prisoner here in the state of New Jersey.
Kareem Pritchett, one of the vice president of PBA Local 105. I represent the Office of the Juvenile Justice Commission and New Jersey State Parole, and I'm happy to be here to take it.
Good afternoon. I'm Dr. Barbara Pompey. I am a member of the New Jersey Association of Black Psychologists and also a member of POP, People's Organization for Progress.
Good afternoon. Alan Wesson. I'm the Legislative Director with the New Jersey Association of Counties, representing the 21 county governing bodies.
Good afternoon. My name is Oscar Aviles. I'm the Director of the Hudson County Department of Corrections. I'm also a representative of the New Jersey County Jail Wardens Association, and I also sit here as a member of the American Jail Association Board of Directors and the National Commission on Correctional Health Care.
Good morning, everyone. I'm Warden Eugene Caldwell. I'm president of the New Jersey County Jail Wardens Association. Have 28 years in county corrections. It's a pleasure being here with everyone. This is going to be a monumental change in corrections. Corrections have changed through the years, and we're just grateful for the opportunity to be able to work together to help you assist in this bill and help us, make it work through the counties. Thank you.
My name is James Riley. I'm the Executive Director of the School of Criminal Justice and Public Administration, and I'm a fellow of the Center. We have students today from our criminal justice programs in the other room viewing this. This is very important, very appropriate for their studies, and it helps to expand their understanding of what the difficulties are in dealing both with inmates and with the care of the inmates.
Well, I'm Officer Michael Koenig, Middlesex County Corrections. I represent the New Jersey State PBA Corrections Committee.
Good morning, I'm Mark Cranston. I'm currently the warden at Middlesex County Jail. I previously served as the Chief of Staff to the Commissioner at the State Department of Correction in New Jersey, and prior to that, 25 years in Rikers, starting out as a correction officer and working my way all the way up through and past warden to chief and ultimately first deputy commissioner.
Good morning, I'm Dave Gallant. I'm the Warren County Sheriff. I represent the Sheriff's Association of New Jersey. I guess you'd say I represent a small correctional facility of approximately 130 beds. Approximately half of the jails are overseen by sheriffs in the state of New Jersey, the county jails, and the other half are overseen by the Board of Chosen Freeholders.
I'm Dr. Linda Goshfeld. I represent the New Jersey Psychiatric Association.
My name is Cookie Rivera. I'm the Administrative Chair of the Integrated Justice Alliance of New Jersey. I am the Board Secretary of the Latino Action Network and the Criminal Justice Reform Chair of that committee. I am also the Executive Board Secretary of the National Coalition of Latino Officers. In the officers element, I am here today as an observer, and in the Integrated Justice Alliance and the Latino Action Network, I am here representing both. I've been an advocate since the 1980s, and I've been trying to save the world ever since. I am completely humbled by the gathering that you brought together today, Senator, and the destruction, or the beginning of the destruction of the silos that keep us from doing human work with state government, federal government, county government, local governments, because they all play a part in making these things get better. So thank you so much.
I'm Frank Argoti Freyer. I'm president of the Latino Action Network, a statewide civil rights organization. We're very, very concerned about this issue. We thank the personnel at Kean for setting this up, the legislators who are here. I'm also proud to say I'm a member of the history department here at Kean, so I'm really happy that we're taking a part in this process. Thank you.
Good morning, I'm Vanessa Wilson. I'm a pastor at Magnolia Road United Methodist Church, and I'm the chair of Religion and Race for the Greater New Jersey Annual Conference of United Methodists. The United Methodist Greater New Jersey Annual Conference represents all of the state of New Jersey, parts of New York, and Pennsylvania. We are also ministry partners with the National Religious Campaign Against Torture. Thank you.
Thank you for including me. My name is Ellen Cherry. I'm a professor of theology at Princeton Theological Seminary. As a member of our team of faculty that's beginning an educational program at the Garden State facility. Oh, it's not on. Sorry, should I do that again?
No, we heard you.
You heard me,
loud and
okay.
clear. Thank you.
Good morning, and thank you, Senator, for hosting this. My name is Bonnie Kerness, and I direct the American Friends Service Committee Prison Watch Project. We've been observing, monitoring, and advocating on behalf of people inside since 1975, specifically monitoring conditions of confinement, and since '86, when we met a man who had been just placed in the control unit and ended up being there for 22 years. We've been focusing on conditions of isolation.
Okay, has everyone introduced Reverend? Oh, I'm sorry, Mr. Oh, I missed all three of you.
Okay, thank you, Senator, for holding this forum. My name is Phil Lubitz. I'm with NAMI, New Jersey, Associate Director there. That's the National Alliance on mental illness. I also, while there, I both oversee our advocacy efforts and our law enforcement education program as well. I also chair the New Jersey State Behavioral Health Planning Council, and also for that body, I represent the New Jersey League of Municipalities.
I'm Barb Johnston. I'm Director of Policy and Advocacy for the Mental Health Association in New Jersey, and we're a not-for-profit advocacy organization focusing on improving conditions for individuals and their families living with mental illness. I also chair our statewide Mental Health Coalition, which are the 11 statewide organizations focused on, again, improving conditions for individuals living with mental health issues. And thank you for your advocacy here.
Good morning. I'm Dr. Kim Retigliano. I'm a professor of ethics and crisis leadership at the State University of New York, Empire State College. And I'm proud to say Bernard Carrick is one of our most honored alums, and he's made a world of difference. I'm here today also, I serve on the board with Commissioner Carrick on the American Coalition for Criminal Justice Reform, and we join with you to be sure that the laws across our country get changed related to how people are treated in prison, not just in solitary confinement, but in all the ways they traverse through our system. I can tell you, based on my experience and what I've learned by working closely with the commissioner, we have a lot of ground to take, and I'm proud that New Jersey is one of the leaders, so thank you, Senator.
I'm Reverend Charles Boyer from the African Methodist Episcopal Church, the Social Action Commission, both on the national level and on the New Jersey level, and I also represent the National Religious Campaign Against Torture. And I deeply appreciate this forum.
Well, thank you very much. I think the best way for us to proceed is, as I saw that everyone introduce themselves, is that we have basically, I see 3 or 4 categories of folks here. One is the people from corrections, 2, mental health focus, and 3, more generic criminal justice corrections reform, either from nonprofits or from a faith-based basis. So why don't we start with the corrections folks, to you guys, form like kind of a panel to give us your thoughts, your suggestions, and your observations. Just whoever wants to start and go from there.
Thank you, Senator. Again, I'm Mark Cranston from Middlesex County. I'm the warden. And probably the reason I would lead off with this group is because I was lucky enough to have been awarded a grant at Middlesex County Jail, working with the Vera Institute of Justice to do a study on safe alternatives to segregation. They have selected 5 jurisdictions in the country, and we're the only county jail in the country that was selected. So it's a big honor to work with them, and it's a 2-year process that has already begun. We had a kickoff meeting in late spring where we conversed with the staff at Vera and staff at the jail. We talked about the different uses of segregation that we had, disciplinary, admin seg, protective custody, and to sort of further what Commissioner Carrick said, one of the things we noticed right away was how we use protective custody, and that's one of the reasons I pursued the grant, and it's where I think we're most vulnerable, in the sense that just because somebody has a vulnerable physical appearance or a different kind of a need for protection but hasn't violated any rules, putting them in 23-hour lockdown is just not going to do it. It's not justice, it's not fair to them. And it's something that we want to look at, and working with the Vera Institute, what you gain is you gain a national reputation of criminal justice reform from a group of people that are very smart at what they do. They're very exceptional at working with municipalities and other governments. And they come in and they go through a bunch of data. They get all your procedures. They look at best practices in the country. They're inclusive. And so what we hope to do at Middlesex County is not just craft a policy that's fairer or more balanced and just, for Middlesex County, through the County Wardens Association and through the president and the executive board, we're all going to work with Vera to try to come up with something that, that provides safety at the facility for sure, but also takes into consideration all the other things that we've heard at the table and a lot of the experiences that people have had. And I think that as far as the legislation goes, timing, you know, in life is everything. I really hope that a lot of the work that we do with the Vera Institute can end up, I think there probably still would be a need for legislation, but I hope that some of the work that we do could end up in the legislation, because I think it's a much more balanced process where folks like ourselves who, you know, we've all worked as correction officers, we've all worked in special housing units, we've all supervised them, and ultimately we're all in charge of them. And we think by having a voice at the table, it's sort of a similar collaboration that's going on today, but having a voice at the table with folks from the Vera Institute and working on a real solid policy that protects the rights and the privilege of everybody is a thoughtful way to do it. And I hope that folks at the table here can give us some of that time to work towards it and make it the most thoughtful process we can have. I don't know, Gene, if you want to take that.
I guess everyone at this table understands that, you know, there is a need for change, and that's why we're all here to work together to change. When we met in Trenton, we voiced our concerns in reference to the difference between a county jail and a state prison and a federal penitentiary. There's a big difference. Our turnover is a lot more quicker than inmates in a state prison. Our timing in reference to our isolated confinement or pre-hearing detention is a lot lower. We'd just like to work together. We're meeting in August with Ms. Ross and the ACLU in reference to, you know, the questions and concerns that came out of Trenton, and we're willing to meet with anyone in reference to educating people in, you know, how a county jail operates and the difference between a county jail and a state prison. The state has a lot more funds that are allocated to help with this and a lot more buildings. On a county level, there's not much funds and there's not much room in reference to, you know, the changes that are proposed in this bill. So we're hoping we can work together to, you know, come to an agreement in reference to what's best for the inmates in the jail, what's best for the staff in the county jail, and what's best for the public at large.
Good morning again. I just want to say it's exciting how everyone is talking about reforming the criminal justice system and corrections at a national level, at a state level, and at a local level. And New Jersey, you have so many bills right now that you guys are introducing. It's exciting to be part of a correctional administration and getting the support of the legislature. And I want to thank the senator and the assembly folks here for doing that. Yeah, we in the New Jersey County Jail Wardens Association, we support this bill. Our issue are relative to some of the definitions in the bill to allow us to be able to manage our facilities. But in the spirit of how the bill is written, we would support 100%. As part of us evolving as an industry, we are actually trying to change our systems as it relates to dealing with offenders with mental illness, drug treatment, reintegration, and reentry services. As we speak next week, the NIC will be in New Jersey providing crisis intervention team training for county correctional facilities, and for county correctional facilities will be part of that training. Next week, the National Institute of Justice, National Institute of Corrections is putting a group together with the National Commission on Correctional Health Care to design and implement mental health services for county jails. And Senator, I'm going to make sure that this bill goes with me when I go to Colorado to be part of that, that intended implementation of health services in county jails. I'm happy to be here, and I'm glad and I'm excited that we're having these discussions.
Everyone, oh, yes, of course.
I was just talking with Warden Caldwell outside prior to the roundtable, and as I said at the outset, I oversee a small correctional center, population 130 to 150, and as it applies to the bill, one concern I have is it says when somebody's designated as a person in the vulnerable population, they're to be placed in a specialized unit. I don't have any place else to put anybody, so hopefully the bill can provide for an avenue when somebody's designated vulnerable. Where do I put them?
Maybe Union County.
I'm sure they'd like to hear that.
That was not really a joke, but maybe that's a good point, and that's something that we'll have to find a solution for, yes.
Thank you.
Yes.
And I'm glad you brought that, Senator. A lot of these county correctional facilities, 21 of them, don't have the resources or the volume to create these specialized units. But as you say, we can create one and all can share into putting those individuals in those units. So there's a potential to do that for a lot of different other populations, but this is one population that can be serviced in the county jails.
Anyone else from you folks? All right, let's hear now.
Listen,
Oh,
yeah, Kareem Pritchard, one of the vice president of PBA Local 105. Again, we represent the New Jersey Department of Correction, Juvenile Justice, and Parole. And we've been a big advocate of having more programs in the correctional facilities to actually prepare these inmates when they go back out into society. So I hope in the bill, we definitely have more programs or more education that can be put into the institution to prepare these young men and women when they come back inside society. Thank you.
Let me just react to that because that's an extremely important point. When I talked about presumptive parole earlier, we have savings there that could be $100 million that could provide. We have to find the resources so that you can help you do your job. Very important point. Thank you. Yes? No? Mental health. Well, let's go. If anyone else from corrections or law enforcement standpoint? Let's go with mental health. You got it.
Great, thank you. So a lot of the things that I'm going to say, I'm sure that some are aware of this, but I think it's really important to reiterate. So not only being here on behalf of New Jersey Association of Black Psychologists, but speaking from the perspective of a mental health professional that have worked with children both in the juvenile justice system and those who have been traumatized, there is a close relationship between the two. I bring up this point because the statistics have shown that 80% of youth that are detained have at least one potential traumatic experience. Keeping that in mind, these are the youth that are potentially placed in solitary confinement. And that right there can be re-traumatizing to them. So I say that to show the importance of knowing the population that is being served within the juvenile justice system. And also another point to bring up is the disproportionate minority representation in the justice system overall. But looking specifically at the juvenile justice system, taking it way back to 1985, 28% of the nation's population were youth of color. 28% of the nation's population in the detention centers were youth of color. By 1997, that grew to 63%, and in 2010, that grew to 71% of the nation's population in the juvenile justice system being individuals of color. And as recently as Friday, July 17th, in the state of New Jersey, and this is the statistic provided online through the Office of the Attorney General, approximately 69% of youth of color are African American, and 20% being Hispanic, and about 11% being white. So that, again, shows the population that is being served and being at risk of placed in solitary confinement. My concern as a mental health professional is the treatment that they are being exposed to. Research has shown that it often leads to an increase in suicidal behaviors. So either an attempt or an expression of suicide. Even though some inmates in the juvenile setting are placed in there may not have a mental illness, they are more prone to having a mental breakdown or becoming seemingly insane. So these inmates eventually begin to lose touch with reality and exhibit signs of a psychotic episode or psychiatric decompensation. There have been other states that have attacked this issue also. And particularly, the ACLU have released a publication where in the state of Maine, they have done away with solitary confinement, and it has worked. And I
That
do
would be
understand
we're talking about for juveniles now, or?
that, I'm sorry, that is adults. I'm sorry,
Adults also.
with Maine, yes. And I do understand the concern of the staff that work in the institutions, especially the correctional officers, because of course they're also at risk, and their safety is an issue when they have an inmate that they cannot find ways to control appropriately. But at the same time, putting them in solitary confinement, as Kareem stated, the issue is how will they be when they come back into society? And the ultimate goal is not to keep people incarcerated for life. Eventually, they do come back into society. So the treatment that they have while they are incarcerated impacts the way they act when they are released back into society. And if they are put in confinement and they're exposed to these things psychiatrically and mentally, how will they act when they come back into society? So it's a holistic perspective in looking at this, not just as a temporary solution for their behaviors and the actions they exhibit while they're there, but we also have to consider what this situation does to them and how that will impact their return back into society. So that's all I have.
Yeah, I want to ask a question, actually, of the correctional officers and also of you in the mental health field. When we know of other states that have done this, for example, Maine, I'd be interested in if anybody has any more specifics on that. What did Maine do specifically in place of solitary? Because if we're getting rid of a program, a not good program, we have to think of how we're going to handle it. I'd also be interested in knowing what you correctional folks think in terms of, what would housing look like if you had separate buildings, separate housing for these people who you would normally put in solitary? How will it be different from solitary? I'd just like to know if anybody can provide any thoughts or specifics, even if you haven't done a study of it. What are your own thoughts working in the system?
Senator, so Maine I became very familiar with because when I was in New York City as the first deputy commissioner, they hired Joe Pont as the commissioner, and he was the former commissioner of Maine, and I got a chance to work with him for about 6 months before I came to Middlesex. And he was real clear with me that Maine reformed their use of solitary confinement substantially. A lot of the committees that were formed to do it in a more thoughtful process throughout the facility. A lot of different entities were included in that committee, folks from mental health, folks from medical, folks from custody. But they did not eliminate it. It's still in existence. There's still solitary confinement is used still for some individuals that they know would perpetrate violence if they were released or have demonstrated continuously perpetrating violence. And they struggle. What they do better, I think, than most other jurisdictions is they, even in those instances, they have limits, and then they have things to do after that. They don't have a huge population statewide. They have about 2,500 inmates. So, I mean, Jersey has, what, 22,000? So it's a smaller facilities, but they have physical plants to utilize, and I think that's what the biggest challenge to any correctional agency is, especially county jails, is the physical plant. Even in a bigger facility than David has, I have places for 1,435 inmates. I have 900 currently in the system. But even if I had the ability to say, okay, this individual is really, a special case, whatever, I could open up a housing area separate for him, put 2 correction officers there, and let that individual not have to be confined to a cell. But ultimately, there's another one that comes behind him, and maybe another one, and then you get into a situation where, just from a, I guess from a financial perspective too, it's how much are you going to invest in that, and if it's not layered with treatment and other kind of things that go on, it's probably not a solution either. So just to give you the information on Maine, I think, not to say that you're incorrect, it's just that I think it was publicized that they sort of eliminated it, but the reality of it was they severely limited it.
Sure.
And then I have a question.
So first, let me say, I think what's most amazing about this bill is that the folks sitting across the table who could have, from the beginning, just said no, and yelled no, and screamed no, and done other things that said no, have taken this as an opportunity to have this conversation. And I think you guys deserve a ton of credit for that. And as Warden Caldwell said, we're planning to meet in August. We've also been meeting with Kareem and his friends at the PBA several times, and I think that's in some ways the most amazing thing that this bill has done before ever leaving committee, and that's impressive. And I agree with what Warden Cranston said about what's happened in Maine. They haven't ended it, but what they did, in addition to lots of the things that this bill did, is they said, if we're talking about this as a housing condition for the worst of the worst, let's make sure we mean that. Let's not throw that around and then put anyone in there. And so we've had a lot of conversations about this, and people say, well, in New Jersey, we really do only put people in ad seg when they've really done horrible things. And so we have the advantage this summer of having legal interns. So I decided to put some of our free labor to work. And I said, just do a search on Westlaw on administrative segregation, Department of Corrections, and see what sort of things people are getting it for. And for sure, people are getting it for the bad stuff that Commissioner Carrick was talking about, for shanking people and weapons and stuff. But they also, we have lying, got someone sent to administrative segregation, cursing at a corrections officer, got someone sent to administrative segregation, and refusing to obey an order when the order was to quiet down. And look, here's the thing. Those are all bad things, and you shouldn't do those things. But the question is that a proportionate response? And is that person the worst of the worst? And I think what the bill does, and what Maine has successfully done, is they've said, if we're going to put someone in this extreme housing unit, this extreme form of punishment, we better make sure it's necessary. Not we're annoyed and we want to respond, but it's necessary to protect the officers, to protect the folks inside. And I think that's what Maine has done really well. And while they haven't eliminated it, their population has just shot down, both with respect to adults and with respect to juveniles.
Why doesn't everybody just jump in who wants to jump in?
Hi, I'd like to jump in. I apologize for having to step out to walk out the commissioner, but I'd like to share with you my experience of Bernard Carrick being in solitary confinement. I had the privilege of visiting him 22 times while he was in the federal prison camp in Cumberland, Maryland. And I first went to see Bernard Carrick in 2011, which was going into his second year of being incarcerated, because I was creating a crisis leadership program at the State University of New York. And who better to talk to about crisis leadership than Bernard Carrick? Unfortunately, I had met him for 1 hour in 2004 when I interviewed him for a book I was writing, Leaders Worth Following, People Who Move the World. And it was that 1 hour that paved the way for me to visit him in 2011, 12, and 13, because if I hadn't met him personally prior to his incarceration, I would have been barred from visiting him. And I learned a great deal from those visits, 8 hours away, one way. Sometimes I dreaded those trips, but they were always incredibly rich. But then the time came for Bernard Carrick to testify in New York City, and he was put in the Metropolitan Correctional Facility right across from where his office had been as police commissioner. And we expected him to be gone for 5 days. And we had no contact with him, and the 5 days turned into weeks. And I can't remember the exact number, but I believe he was in that facility in solitary confinement for at least 5 weeks, not 5 days. And I have the writings in my lockbox in Toms River, New Jersey, where I live, of this man who had the most impeccable handwriting. You would have thought it was the handwriting of a girl, because it's almost calligraphy, his handwriting, when he has his faculties about him. And I have in my lockbox these sheets of yellow lined paper with pencil stub writing that are barely coherent. In fact, some sentences make absolutely no sense.
Can I ask, if I may? Because what Mr. Carrick described is torture and totally unnecessary. So let me ask you folks, the corrections folks, is that possible to occur in our county or state system? I mean, why no newspapers? Why no books? Why one phone call a month? Why one visitor a month for an hour? Is that possible in our system? May I, if you?
Sure.
Because that was the federal system.
No, understood. I mean, I can speak for Middlesex County in that disciplinary lockup is different than administrative segregation. In disciplinary lockup, you're put in there for a finite period of time based on a rule violation, and then your things are taken away from you based on your disciplinary infraction. In administrative segregation, that's different in the sense that you're not under a disciplinary restriction, so a lot of those things are given back to you.
Okay, so things are taken away from you. So in addition to taking away from you your interaction with other human beings, I don't know, which seems to me to be pretty severe punishment in and of itself.
Right. Well,
things like books, visitors, newspapers, telephone calls, seems to me to be on there. What I have heard is that what we need to review is, we all know that solitary confinement, isolated confinement is necessary under certain circumstances. But even when it is necessary, is it necessary to go to that extreme? And is that helpful in the entire criminal justice process?
Well, for the disciplinary side of it, I think that I can give you tons of examples of acts that are committed by those in disciplinary lockup, which include self-harm and different kind of things, with some of the things that would sound reasonable to give somebody in court.
Somebody may hit themselves over the head with a book?
Well, yeah, I've seen people, wrap paper as tight as they could to shove it down their throat so they can, stop themselves from breathing and other things. So, and that goes to a lot of the mental health arguments against it. But point being, these are individuals that psychiatrists themselves have deemed manipulative, that they don't have an underlying mental health condition, that they don't have.
And that's, again, I'm sorry for interrupting, but that's a good point. Maybe we have the mental health folks address that as well, because it seems to me, and again, I'm a layperson, but it seems to me under those circumstances, there needs to be a referral to some kind of mental health evaluation.
And there is.
Okay.
It seems like we're really talking about two things. One, managing behavior, and then protecting the safety of officers who are responsible for.
No, he's actually talking about protecting the safety.
Well, the safety of the inmates and the staff.
And yeah, I mean, this whole discussion, I think, revolves around that. The Division of Mental Health Services, and I'm really happy to hear about what you're doing in Middlesex, because a few years back, Division of Mental Health Services had a federal grant to reduce the use of restraints and confinement in the psychiatric hospitals. And during the period where the grant was operating, they literally were able to remove all use of restraints and isolation. I think the only facility where it didn't really take hold was in the forensic hospital. But for the other patients, it almost went away entirely. And I think, so there may be some lessons learned that you're going to pick up in your study, but there may be some lessons that already exist from the experience the hospitals found. I think one of the things we're finding, and one of the things maybe legislation should address, that after the study goes away, frequently the incentive to continue to reduce restraint and seclusion goes away as well. So, we really need to have a way of assuring that we're maintaining the attention to, whatever techniques are learned. I'm really happy about Hudson County as well, that are going to bring crisis intervention training to their corrections officers. So CIT is now being taught in 7 of the police academies here in New Jersey. There are well over 2,000 officers that have been trained in a way to recognize a person with a mental illness and learn to de-escalate, a person who's in a psychiatric crisis. Very effective. We're hopefully keeping a lot of people with mental illness out of the front door of the jail, and that's going to resolve a lot of the problems, that we face. But the other piece of that, I think that's equally as important, is that there's an enormous diminishment in the number of officers who are injured. And again, our real hope is that we're going to protect officers as well in this process. Two last things that I just want to mention as we look at this, and I know legislation can really help this, but Commissioner Carrick mentioned part of the isolation was being isolated from his family. This idea of a month away, especially for people with mental illness, whose real connection to society is their family. I think it is even more difficult, more harmful when you put up barriers to having families involved in both their treatment in the hospital, but also being there, because they're really going to be the people who are looking after people, lending support when they are released from jail. Really, all of the corrections programs, release programs we set up, essentially are making up for a lack of family bonds. Right? Those programs do things that families naturally normally do and are missing in a lot of the people who are released from jail. So we should be doing everything we can to encourage continuity between the inmate and his family. And lastly, continuity in medication. One of the really biggest problems for a person with mental illness going into a jail, because of restrictive formularies, the cost factor, is really continuing them on medications that may have been working but discontinued, that led to a person committing a crime. If we had a fuller formulary and we could make sure that there's continuity of care, especially medication, when the person's coming into the correctional facility and also when the person's leaving the correctional facility, I think we could do a lot to improve the situation. And the municipal level as well.
I definitely agree with that. One of the things we're working on for our new medical contract is just that. It's the ability to provide the same medication coming in, because whatever the cost are, even if it's a little higher or whatever, doesn't compare to the cost that the security incident would cost or the injuries to everybody. And the same thing going out to the community, which is equally or more important, because if someone is going to lose their connection to the medication going out to the streets, you can't be surprised they're coming back in 2 days. So that's certainly something to focus on. The only thing I just want to throw one thing in here. I think a lot of times we have these discussions, there's sort of two separate categories. We'll always talk about the extreme circumstances because they're the ones we deal with all the time. We can all tell you stories, I'm sure you've heard a bunch of them about certain individuals. But we're completely willing to understand that that's an extreme circumstance and we need a sort of a separate deal for that. But in the larger degree, yeah, I think we all think that maybe we can do some different things about the conditions in the cell, the access to certain things, all under the protection of security. But I think everybody's willing to think outside the box on that.
I think one of the really interesting things about the CIT training for officers on the street is part of that 40-hour training is having the officers visit the mental health unit in a jail. And they very quickly understand, please do everything you can to keep that person with mental illness out of the jail and get him into mental health treatment.
Senator, I got to chime in a little bit. From the Juvenile Justice Commission side of point, I've been a correction officer for the past 12 years. The residents do not lose the education, or they don't lose any writing materials when they go into a room restriction, which we don't call it solid confinement. They still have contact with the...
Is that for juveniles?
Just the juveniles.
Juveniles?
Juveniles, yes. They do receive mail. They are able to send out mail. They have reading materials. They have writing materials. They have mental health that comes in. They have medical that comes in. There's other residents that's in cells next to their cells. So they're not alone. They're not isolated. So I just want to make sure that's understood. I didn't want nobody to have a misunderstanding of that.
May I?
May I?
So
Senator
we,
Greenstein's in charge.
Senator, a couple of comments and then questions. The AFSC gets mail from county facilities. It gets mail from juvenile facilities, immigration detention facilities, and state prisons. And I have compiled a lot of it very recently in a booklet called Testimonies of Torture in New Jersey Prisons, addressing some of the extreme things that you're talking about that happen to people. I'm wondering.
I think that you were talking about the extreme actors in prison, not
Yeah.
the extreme things that are done to the prisoners.
Well,
correct?
or the extreme things that happen.
I'm sure both exist.
Yeah,
Without
right.
doubt.
Right. Senator, when we testified at the legislative hearing, you were very forthright in asking for data from the state, and I don't see anybody here from the state, but for the data from the state, and I'm wondering if that came in from juvenile detention facilities, from immigration facilities.
I have some data from the state corrections that I will share with you. It's kind of like getting something from DEP that I'm trying to ferret out in this Exxon case. I mean, it's just so voluminous, but I will share it with you, and I'm not sure.
Just so we know
Absolutely.
what we're talking about in terms of numbers and the amount of change that's going to have to take place. I am very distorted because the first person I ever met in an adult ADSEG facility was 17, and I swear he was there for being 17. He was obnoxious, he was inappropriate, he was angry, and he stayed there for 10 years. The next person I met was told by the department that he had leadership, and this was state, that he had leadership capacity, radical leadership capacity. He spent 22 years in the management control unit. So for me, this is a moral thing, it's an ethical thing, and I understand very much.
That's here in New Jersey.
Oh, that's here in New Jersey. So and that we have to be careful about how we change things because safety is a priority.
May I? I'd like to offer some direct examples of the kinds of administrative segregation and disciplinary measures that occurred here in New Jersey. Let's just call this gentleman Luis. He had received a watch in a time when parents could send watches to prison. He stayed in his cell for 10 years. His watch broke. There was a screw from his watch that was broken, and he had it next to his toothbrush in a little basket. Because that screw was loose, there was a whole administrative hearing. It took about 2 years, and for this screw being in this basket, he received 6 months of ADSEG. That was definitely administrative segregation. Let's call this young man Hector. That was East Jersey State Prison. Let's call this young man Hector, New Jersey State Prison. He doesn't have a lot of family ties. He's hungry, he has no resources. He tells his buddy Frank over here, let your girlfriend send me $35. Literally, the amount was $35. She puts the $35 in his account so he can get some food. Well, this young man, because of that infraction, is spending 10 years in, I believe, disciplinary
By the way, if
segregation.
I may, one of the things that the legislation does do is limit the time, and then if there's a need to extend it, there would be a review on a regular basis. So I think that's very important that these things just don't continue to go on unabated. Yes.
Yeah, the only thing we ask for is, the difference between the State Department of Corrections and the county jails. I mean, you have people in the State Department of Corrections that are doing 5, 10, 15, 20, 30 years, when, people in the county jails are revolving in and out of the door, 72 hours, they're in and out, and they only are sentenced up until 364 days. So, our max for ours is 15 days. But to go back to what she was saying in reference to to Bernard, in reference to that may be the policy for that facility in reference to, what he experienced there. Each facility has their own policy in reference to how we handle things, just like this lady was here saying that person was in ADSEG. For a county jail setting, that would be disciplinary detention. because he violated a policy or rule that we had.
Don't you think that we shouldn't have separate policies for every institution? A state institution should be a certain way, county should be a certain way.
And they are now. They have their 10A, and we have 10A Chapter 31, which governs everything we do day in and day out. And we're inspected by the State Department of Corrections once a year, where they review all our policies and procedures, review our disciplinary detentions or ad segs to make sure we're following their rules and regulation, which is governed by the government.
But
I just say there-
we're asking for some caveats in the legislation so that you may be dealing with a state correction problem. And by acts of legislation might be worthy to do, but if it applied to us, could actually hinder some of the things that we're doing. I think that's where we're
So can I
driving
just
at.
say, I think that's right, that there are differences in general terms of how long people stay in county jails versus state prisons that require some different thinking. And there's also huge size differences, between the Warren County Jail and New Jersey State Prison. But there's another difference that cuts the other way, and I don't think it undermines the position, but I think it gets us here, which is that most of the folks that you guys are dealing with in the county jails haven't been convicted of a crime, right? So while the Eighth Amendment of the United States Constitution says people in prison should not be subjected to cruel and unusual punishment, people in pretrial detainees, which is most of your population, aren't allowed to be subjected to punishment at all, right? They can't be punished because they haven't committed a crime. They can be, kept safe and the public can be protected and so forth. So we need to think about both sides of the ways in which jails are different from prisons. And I think
I agree with you, and I think that in some of the cases, what Senator Lesniak pointed out too, was even the conditions within the detention, what you can have, what you can't have, and then that kind of thing. So I think there's definitely room. Actually, that's a big part of some of the work I'm doing with Vera and in coordination with the Jail County Warden Association, is that those things, what kind of conditions.
By the way, I expect just by this conversation and this dialogue and the legislation we've introduced and your participation, that in and of itself is going to be a substantial improvement. Not to say that we won't need specific legislation to put things in place, but I think we've already seen the benefit, as Alex said, just from your efforts alone.
The administrative code itself was written in 1986, and that in and of itself needs to be looked at, revisited, and upgraded. Warden Cranston is unique to New Jersey in that he brings the experience of New York State, which is a different structure and a much more voluminous types of structures, that he has this type of expertise that will be vital to our work here. Warden Oscar Aviles is extremely also creative in some of the things that he's been able to do in Hudson County Jail, which is something that we should learn from. And I'm just humbled to be in the room with you. You don't even know me yet. I'm sorry, I don't know you.
She said yet.
That's the key word, yet.
The community programs that we also talked about, while we're talking about in-jail programs, we're also talking about community programs that are specifically non-existent in New Jersey. There are these new sprouting up things called reentry task forces that are kind of looking at things in Middlesex County, and Warden Cranston is part of a new one under freeholder polos. But county jails are kind of governed by freeholders, and they kind of need to be at this table as well. With the absence of community programs, once someone comes out that has been in a jail or a prison, let's say for 20 years and never has held a cell phone, there's a whole lifestyle of learning that this person has to accomplish, and it's not very easy. Immigration in the county jails is a very different subject, which just is not always discussed at these kinds of tables. There's segregation units, there's federal guidelines, there's all these differences of things. There's 287G that doesn't even allow you to know if he's in your jail or your jail. And these things, if we're talking about a human element, and we don't know what kind of conditions they're living in, except that they're automatically segregated from in county corrections. So that's important for someone who's undocumented. I'm sorry.
Where people are automatically segregated for what reason?
Immigration, detainees.
They're a different classification of people in prison.
detainees can't be housed with pretrial criminal detainees.
But they're housed in county jails. Elizabeth.
But I don't believe they're in segregation.
Well, they can't be housed, but not isolated.
Right.
Not necessarily.
Okay.
Segregated to sections. The coalitions of advocates have been working on this since 2000, and we're very much collectively around this table, and we work together in this, and we just applaud what you're doing here at the legislative level. But back in the 90s, I believe under Bill Waldman, if any of you remember him, legislators went on welfare for a day just to live and experience what it is to be on food stamps and to live on that type of allotment.
Here, I understand.
Say it again?
Can we?
Oh, no. The reason why I'm saying that is the chapters, Princeton and Trenton chapters to end Jim Crow created a solitary confinement mobile unit that they go throughout communities and that they say, sit in a cell. And I'm just referring to Bill Waldman from way back there because legislators actually went on welfare for a day. So I would also offer that there's a cell unit that you could sit in to experience what that feels like as well.
I understand. Can we move on? Yes.
Yes.
I just want to echo what she says regarding immigration detention and most of the issues with the criminal justice system. Solitary confinement is also applicable, and all the practices that we discuss here today, you will also observe that in immigration detention facilities, which are county jails, housing county jails, also in private facilities like Elizabeth Detention Center and Delaney Hall. The use of solitary confinement is there, it's inappropriate most of the time, and not even to mention that immigration laws violation are civil violations. So this immigrant in the number of 2,000 in the state of New Jersey are detained in county jail and in this private facility because they are waiting their deportation proceeding. And we've seen over the past 10 years the spread and overuse of solitary confinement there as well.
You know, one of the things that I pray doesn't get lost in this discussion, two things actually, is the importance of data and the ongoing data to tell the demographic story. New Jersey has done a marvelous job in reducing the prison population, but remains the third worst state in the country for racial disparities. As an African American, you're 12 times more likely to be in prison in New Jersey than anywhere else than anywhere else in the country. And so it's important that we understand the data, because if African Americans and people of color are disproportionately shuffled into the prison system, then by logic, there's a good chance that they're disproportionately susceptible to solitary confinement. On top of that, to understand communities of color, you have to understand that there's a stigma to mental health. People of color tend not to have their mental health issues checked out. And so when you have disproportionate amounts of people of color in the correctional facilities, and there's a good chance that they have not had their mental health diagnosis done correctly, then logic would tell us that folks are being disproportionately added into solitary confinement. So my prayer is that an ongoing, comprehensive, and clear and fluid data collection on demographics will be done, and that the mental health piece of all of this would be aggressive, so that people aren't being disproportionately subjected to solitary confinement.
Along those same lines, there's been a recent study just done on that very topic. And this study indicates that somewhere between 20 and 60% of the prisoners held in solitary confinement have serious mental illnesses which were diagnosed and or manifested prior to isolation. And for the purposes of this study, those serious or major mental disorders include psychotic symptoms, functional impairment, schizophrenia, bipolar disorder, and other major depressive disorders. It goes on to say, and I think this is where we really need to concentrate some efforts. It goes on to say that there is little hope for those prisoners already suffering from mental illness to get better in isolation. And one of the concerns that I experienced as a former warden in the jail system and in Illinois in the prison system was the deinstitutionalization of the mentally ill has created a problem that it seems to keep manifesting itself and it is very problematic in
crime
isolation.
problem, are you saying?
Well, not the crime problem, just in prison. We have a group of prisons and jails have become the de facto mental institutions for society. Now, we can argue whether or not it was a good idea to deinstitutionalize or not, and we'll save that for another topic. But the problem is we are now experiencing and have been for a long period of time, an increase of mental illness in a place where mental illness is not the primary concern. Primary concern is security and control. Another issue, if you read Plato versus Brown, which is the California case, where the Supreme Court upheld the circuit court who required California to release 49,000 prisoners, and that was on that day. They still have to release prisoners. The big issue was the fact that for 3 years, California, with the money to hire, could not find sufficient mental health professionals to service their prison population.
Well, you know, and I think you really hit the nail on the head there, because our legislation does address that overall issue, requiring mental health evaluations, requiring referrals, but at the same time, we're going to have to make sure that that's real by providing the resources to get that
And
done.
this just brings up one other point, and that is, in solidarity with the county jails, I always found it to be presumptive that the State Department of Corrections would come in and tell us what we were doing right and we were doing wrong, when there is no body, no oversight body for the Department of Corrections. And in Illinois, I can tell you we have the John Howard Association. And you know, they swung a big bat and a big stick.
By the way, I did invite the commissioner personally to attend today or send a representative, and I did not get a response.
And I just think there are enough qualified individuals who are interested in serving the state of New Jersey further, who could serve on some type of board, a legislative board, that would do exactly that. Look and make sure that the Department of Corrections is doing the thing that they're supposed to do. Because taking their word for it doesn't seem to have resolved this problem based on what I'm hearing around the table.
I just want to briefly build on what the Reverend said. It was a perfect segue. According to the Justice Policy Institute, an average of 60% of all those incarcerated in the United States are, 60% of the nation's prison population is African American or Hispanic. And in New Jersey, Latinos and African Americans make up about 70% of the prison population. So it's a real big concern for us.
I think juveniles is even higher.
It is. Yeah, so I mean, it's a real great concern in our communities, and we really strongly advocate your efforts in this behalf. It's really, really important to us. So it's just I wanted to build on that point. Thank you.
We're going to open it up soon for questions, but yes.
I share Alex's optimism that together that we can, and with this bill, we can have a system that will be safer for both people who are imprisoned, who live in the prisons, and the people who work in the prisons. However, I really want to say out loud that business cannot continue as usual. There would have to be major changes in the way the state prisons are run. At least those are the facilities that I'm more familiar with, in order for this bill to be meaningful. And I just want to note some of the areas that require attention, which we probably can't talk about entirely today. Some people have mentioned some of them. There has to be a change from just a punitive approach to a rehabilitation approach in our prisons. The relationship between the mental health system and the prison system has to change, and it can change. NAMI worked for a number of years on a bill that would have diverted more people with mental illness from the correctional system and would have provided more continuity of care, made it harder for mentally ill people to get into prison and easier to get into the mental health system. Due process, the rule of law in the prisons. We have, as many of the people in this room know, 10A, the New Jersey Administrative Code that governs operations in the state prisons, has a lot of very good language about the procedures that take place before a person can be placed in solitary confinement. But people like Howard and other people here who have been in the system know that those procedural systems are not meaningful. So that means also, and someone else has mentioned, there must be independent oversight of the Department of Corrections. This issue of solitary confinement, we can't solve all those problems before we try to pass your bill, but we are going to have to look at these issues that have to do with our commitment laws, with the due process laws. Oversight and transparency has been mentioned, and also parole. I think you mentioned presumptive parole. We can use the presumptive parole bill that's been introduced in the legislature to try to get people.
Mine.
It's yours too?
Yep, of course.
Thank you. We can use that with an extra paragraph to
two
get
for
people
one.
with serious mental illness out of the prison system on their first parole date. And when you talked about, you asked if the kinds of experience that Bernard had, what could happen in New Jersey. I just want you to think about the West Compound of New Jersey State Prison, built in 1836, I think, where the solitary confinement cells in the West Wing are 5 by 7, no windows, no ventilation, filthy mice, rats, etc.
Well, thank, if I may.
And therefore,
And about 102 degrees today.
Okay, we
So,
have to.
there are a lot of things that I'm sorry, that have to change, and I think we need to face
I
that
hear
and
you.
not avoid those issues.
I hear you. I know, Alex, you're biting at the, chasing at the bit to say something, but let me just say now that what we have maybe even started today, is a dialogue that has been long overdue. And that is somehow, as I opened up my statement, that about criminal justice in New Jersey and across America is not working and needs a total overhaul. And what we have heard throughout from every sector involved in the criminal justice system here is that we have lost our way in terms of the difference between incarceration being for rehabilitation or for punishment. There's obviously a deterrent part of it, but part of the deterrent part of it is rehabilitation. And that's something I think we, as a society, to a great extent, have lost, and that's why we have so many people in prison. So this has been great. I want to thank you all. Alex, you want to say something, and then we want to open up questions to the
I
folks.
do, but I really want to let Howard talk too, just because I feel like this is a voice that we haven't heard yet, and your mind's been heard. So I'd love to say 30 seconds worth, but why don't you go first?
Sure. As a former prisoner, I'd like to say.
Oh, I'm sorry. Yes, you have
Yes.
done it.
I'd like to say three things specifically. The first is about the civilian oversight or oversight over the DOC as a whole. There's a big difference between putting stuff on paper, legislating, writing rules, and what is the actuality on the ground. I've had in my hand the 10A on several occasions, and I've had in my face the reality on a day-to-day basis, and the two don't match up. They almost never match up. So, for me, the idea of new legislation is great because it puts a tool in the hands of both staff members and inmates to be able to regulate a situation, but there has to be an oversight to step in and to say, listen, we're going to do it by the book on both sides. I have great sympathy for staff members. I'm not a person who comes in as a former prisoner and says, we're always right and staff is always wrong. I don't believe that. I think there has to be a real balance. I think that staff does great work often, but I think that there are some situations where, because we reside in the prison system in a society that is closed, and the only thing that ever gets out about what happens is reported by the people who do it, there really is a disparity. So I think that some of the even statistics that come out are a little skewed. The other thing I like to say is that there's a big difference between isolation and segregation. We've talked a lot about units that are set up for whether immigration detainees or mental health units, which, by the way, I worked on for 25 years. So I know a lot about the mental health system within the Department of Corrections in the state of New Jersey. I had several different jobs while I was incarcerated working with mental health inmates, and I've seen it at its worst and at its best. And so I can tell you from my own personal experiences that there is a necessity for certain segments of the population to be removed from the general population, both for their own safety, for the safety of the other inmates around them, and for the safety of staff. It just needs to be done. But they don't need to be isolated. I think there's a big difference between that. There's a difference between moving someone to a place where they can get the help they need, where they can be dealt with on a more realistic level, where they're the focus and it doesn't take away from the day-to-day operations of the institution, and sticking them in a room because you don't know how to deal with them and just throwing them off out of the picture. That too often happens, even within the mental health system, within the prisons itself. And the last thing I'd like to say is that, you know, we talked about the necessity for rehabilitation to move back to the forefront. For the last 4 years of my incarceration, I was in East Jersey State Prison and had the opportunity to work in the education department. The latter part of that period of time, a rule came down. Actually, the rule was activated because it was always there, where if you didn't have your GED, you didn't have your high school diploma, you were of a certain age, you were getting close to release, you had to go to school. It was no longer an option. The administrator at the time in East Jersey put it so that you couldn't even work if you refused to go to school. The only way you could have a job was if you also went to school to work to obtain your GED. You had to get it done. And I saw a lot of guys who, you know, for years, 10, 13, some 20 years of incarceration had never taken the opportunity to get a GED, had never even been recognized that they needed to do so. There were men who worked on some of the maintenance details, and because of their talents and their skills, were excused. Staff members would literally say, well, they don't have to go to school because I need them over here to do this. I need them over here. Their skills were more important than them as human beings.
Mandating that is a good thing.
Absolutely.
Absolutely.
Absolutely. Because I think you cannot walk out. I think somebody said, you know, for a person who's been incarcerated for a long period of time, walking out and just handling a cell phone is a big deal. Now, I'm a tech guy. You know, I sat in front of a computer for 4 years, so I had the opportunity to study technology. But I know had I not, you know, I would have been lost. You know, I walked out of the door after 3 decades of being away from society, and I had to come back to a place and be told, now you have to follow all these rules, now you have to meet all these requirements, and now you have to be in all these places. And if I didn't have family support and the opportunity to have done some work on my own while I was incarcerated, I would have been lost. Before long, I probably would have been right back into another prison setting, starting all over again. So I think that all of these different things have to be looked at. There is no one single fix. I think this is a great start, Senator, and I'd applaud you for that. But I would hope that one of the major pieces of this legislation would be oversight. And I can't state that enough. There has to be somebody looking and saying, this is what's written, now let's make sure that this is also what's being done.
Well, that was a mistake to let him speak before me. I should have gotten first, but I've learned from the error of my ways. But I think it actually works well. You know, I think the guys on the other side of the table here, everyone would agree that if it's hard to do with 100 people, it would be easier to do with 50 people. And so part of the problem, part of the thing that makes solving this solitary confinement conundrum so difficult is that we have too many people locked up. And so you've really contextualized this right, that this is part of broader criminal justice reform. We can't ignore the impact that the changes in the bail law are going to have, hopefully for the better, juvenile justice reform, all these things are going to matter. But I want to frame it because it's scary. You talked about that as a function of our population, we incarcerate more people than any country. We also incarcerate more people total than any country in the world. So that's more people than China. That's more people than Russia. More people. We are 5% of the world's population and 25% of the world's prisoners. Now, I'm a New Jersey guy. I have a lot of New Jersey pride. So usually when I hear bad stuff about the United States, I assume that it's because of Alabama or because of Texas, right? It's the fault of some southern state that we look bad. But it's not true, right? Here's the thing. If New Jersey were a country, other than the United States, it would have the second highest incarceration rate in the world.
Really?
After Cuba, right? So we're that bad. We're better than Alabama, but we're that bad worldwide, and we need to change.
And as you know, I abolished mandatory sentencing for most nonviolent drug offenses. And that was quite a while ago. That was I have been told has had a significant effect in reducing our prison
We've done
population.
a terrific job in
not
New Jersey, but but even now, even with all these improvements, right? We've cut our prison population from around 30,000 to around 22,000, under 22,000. That's a big decrease. but there's still a long way to go before we get to where we need to be. And if we want to address solitary confinement in a meaningful way, we need to address population, because you guys won't be able to do it if you're bursting at the seams. If you have the empty space and the empty beds, Kareem will be happy to continue to staff up if they can, do the what you were talking about, Howard, in terms of, you might have to remove someone from general population. That doesn't mean he needs to be sitting alone in his cell.
Correct.
But that's going to take money.
Let's open it up to any of the folks around the room. Any questions, observations, statements, or? Yes.
Hi, I'm just a guy with a podcast. My name is Paul Brubaker. And now I have a microphone. Things are getting better. To the gentleman's point, though, first of all, I want to commend you, Senator Lesniak, and your colleagues in the state legislature for holding this forum. I don't have a personal vested interest in this issue, but I do have a question, having covered as a journalist issues of incarceration here in New Jersey. Given what we just heard from a variety of points of view, and the fact that the first thing I heard in this room was Commissioner Carrick's point about resources being needed, and the complexity of this issue, whether it relates to solitary confinement or other issues of incarceration and our justice system, does New Jersey need a federal penitentiary?
I don't understand the question.
Okay,
Let me. Question?
let me explain further. Somebody raised the issue of immigration detainees that usually get loaded into the county jail populations. In some counties, that facility is privatized. The gentleman before, I'm sorry, I don't know your name. Alex. Okay. All right. Alex, you raised the point about the fact that somebody who is a pretrial detainee should not be punished, constitutionally speaking, but they're also in with the general population, or people that are immigration detainees are mixed in with the general population of a county jail. We don't have a federal penitentiary in New Jersey. Is that a problem? And if the answer is no, then,
We do have a federal.
do we? Where is it?
Fort Dix.
Fort Dix. How is that a federal penitentiary?
I spent 2 of the best years of my life. No.
Yeah, half of it is federal penitentiary and half is military.
Okay, well, we don't.
There we go.
All right, thank you.
No,
Excuse me, if you don't mind, given I'm a professor. Paul, I need to take you to task for a second, because I think this is a learning opportunity for all of us, which is...
taking a test?
Paul, who
Oh,
spoke?
Paul, this guy. Okay.
Can you come over so I can see you? You said, I don't have a personal vested interest in this.
Fine. We all do.
And every American has a personal vested interest in our country being fair, being a country of second chances. So all of us have a stake in this.
Let me suggest something else, because we also have a stake for our own safety. I think many of you know the story about how I was robbed at 2:30 in the morning, 2 guys standing over my bed. First thing I heard was one of them said, "Shoot him." And then his partner, Bernie Kenny, said, "Stay cool. We're not going to hurt you. We're just in a bad place right now." He said, "We're good people. We're just in a bad place right now." And it impressed me that he didn't say we're not bad people. He said we're good people. Just that they were strung out on crack cocaine. They took my money, they left, they didn't harm me. Needless to say, they were picked up in a couple days. You don't rob senators, it's not a good idea. But I testified on their behalf to get them into drug court and rehabilitation. Why? Because I'm such a nice guy? No, I didn't want them standing over my bed 2 years later, or 4 years later, or 5 years later. So yes, we have a stake in it, not only as decent human beings, but also for our own protection, okay, to ensure that folks in prison, number one, are treated humanely, have an opportunity to learn, and when they come out, don't come out with serious mental illnesses because of isolated confinement, so that they don't get back in and commit other crimes. So we all have a big stake in this. Okay, any other?
I would just like to make one more point, and I just want to emphasize what you started with, and that's about juveniles and how vulnerable they truly are. And I want to make sure that they're part of our plan in terms of advocacy and making sure that they have the same rights, the same treatments. And while I appreciate there are regulations that help them with education, it's not enough and it's not consistent in terms of practice. And with the vulnerability of our youth in institutions and prisons and centers, all of them, scattered throughout, I think it's extremely important that we pay special attention because their brains are developing, and this kind of trauma really results in permanent damage for them. And I know my mental health colleagues agree with me on that. I just don't want us to lose sight of that.
Thank you.
Just one thought, that the Department of Corrections is more than a set of institutions. It's a state of mind, and people have alluded to that very much. I think we also can never forget to look for how race-based it is. That always has to be there. And you're talking about the juveniles, reminds me of the importance of oversight, but specifically for the step-down process. I've treated and dealt with people who have walked out of decades of isolation onto the streets, and it is a shock.
Sure. Yes.
Yeah, as a psychiatrist, sorry, I wanted, I'm impressed with what everybody said. Of course, we have treatment for people with serious mental illness, but it is still very limited. If people are in solitary confinement, they have no opportunity for confidential discussion with a mental health practitioner. The physical situation is such. This is something that we wanted to add to this bill. We certainly support the bill. We wanted to work with the people on how to hone some of the things. I wanted to remind you that besides the psychiatric symptoms, the leading to depression, anger, anxiety, there's also suicide. And the figures of 2/3 of suicide in prisons have occurred in isolated confinement. So that this is certainly a danger that we have to know about. I work in community mental health, and the issue of the transition is very important. People are coming out of prison, they don't have their benefits, they don't have Medicaid, their families may be gone. We certainly need to pay more attention to that to keep people in the community and not in the prison.
Appreciate that very much. Yes, we still have some more time, a few more minutes.
I just wanted to remind us about the sacredness of all human life. And it's very easy for us because we're data people and we're clinicians. We can crunch the numbers and we can have a position, but at the end of the day, the good, the bad, the ugly, and all in between, these are God's people. We are God's people. And so as we draft policies and legislation, and I commend you, Senator, for your work, let's look back at how we value human life. And let's look at the trauma that in many times caused people to be in the situations initially. Not only the trauma of this life, but historic trauma, generational trauma, how this is played out in communities of color, because the statistics do bear out that there are more people of color, more people from impoverished backgrounds that are in prison and probably therefore in administrative segregation, isolation, or whatever we call it. What I would ask for as we move forward in this very, very complex system is that somehow we get standardized language, because it's very difficult to ask a question because is it solitary confinement, is it administrative segregation, is it disciplinary isolation? So it becomes a lawyer's game, and I'm a lawyer by training, well, I'm a second career pastor. but it becomes a lawyer's game, and it's very hard for people to get their hand around the issue. So as we move forward, can we have standard language and standard policies? And maybe when we talk about oversight, you know, we have the administrative code, we have all sorts of code. New Jersey is just the state of lawyers, it's wonderful. However, where's the crosswalk to the application? Who's looking at how we apply the administrative code, the statutes, to the daily life? And so we can have some sort of independent group, an independent group that could just look at the crossroad. How do we do what we say we're doing? And are we doing what we say that we want to do? Thank you.
Yes, I want to thank you for allowing me to be here today. I'm coming from a theological school, and as a theologian, I just want to add a word from that field. Keep in mind the word penitentiary is a theological term. It comes from the medieval practice of penance, and our notion of isolating people from society and putting them in boxes, as you can see in Philadelphia, that's now a museum, our first penitentiary, was predicated on a monastic model. That isolating people would give them time to self-reflect and repent. But also keep in mind that the monastic model was a replacement for the eremitical model. In the beginning of the 6th century, Benedict of Nursia, people had fled into the desert to perfect themselves away from the corrupting influences of the city. And they went into the desert and they populated the desert as hermits. But people developed what they then called ascedi or ascedia, or differently pronounced, and it's what we would today call depression, because it was self-solitary confinement. And they only came out 1 hour a week to be together, to pray together. And Benedict realized how harmful this was psychologically and created monasteries where they would live together, take meals together, even if they had their own private cell. And the word cell in a prison context comes from the monastic term cell. So there's a lot of continuity here, and the recognition of the destructive potential psychology of the eremitical setting led to the communal sharing of communal life. So I'm delighted to see all of us being able to work together for the care, as you say, of all of the people. Thank you.
Well, thank you, and on that theological note, very uplifting and inspiring and spiritual. We'll end this conference. We'll
Senator,
have
if I
lunch.
may.
Oh, we won't end this conference. Where'd that come from?
Colin Scotty, student at Kean University.
I'm sorry. You know what? You guys were quiet. We have time, please.
I applaud you for this bill. It will no doubt improve the quality of life for inmates who are new to the system and those who have not yet entered it. However, and I believe Kareem alluded to the need for training programs prior to release, for those inmates who have spent an extended time in the system, whether segregated or isolated prior to this bill, what policies, if any, are there to follow up on them upon their release back into our community, specifically those who have maxed out their sentence and may fall outside of the parole system?
That's a very good question, a little broader than the topic here, but to fall back into my presumptive parole legislation, one of the problems with requiring that with the many prisoners, because of our parole system maxing out, when they get out, they're out. When they get out on their maximum incarceration date, they're subject to parole. They have oversight. There are systems in place. So that's first of all, most importantly, is to institute presumptive parole so that less folks are maxing out and come out with nothing. And then, of course, the overall whole system of what do we do with folks in prison in terms of their education and their training. Broad issue, something that needs a lot of work, for sure.
The Deputy Commissioner of the Department of Corrections testified at the hearing and we saying that people who do transition from the management patrol unit after decades carefully. We have begun to hear about people who are not being transitioned even into the prison population select people will be meeting with the commissioner in August because we want to know more about how they are doing this, what their policies are.
And probably the most significant thing we've heard here, not, well, at least a significant thing for sure, is that no matter what we do, we're going to have to make sure that there's oversight that what we do is actually put in practice. And you folks are our best resources, because you know right there on the ground exactly what happens. So. Yes.
Some of the communities of faith, the United Methodist Church in particular, are developing what we are calling healing communities, and that's a model out of Healing Communities USA, where we have communities of faith as stations of hope to train people how to work with people as they re-enter the community. That is a good model. We found it to be very useful. We're actually having training in that area this Saturday at Rutgers Law School in Newark. At least it gives the faith-based community the tools to work with people so that they understand the complexity of helping people. So it's wraparound in terms of dealing with individuals or returning citizens as holistic people.
Well, thank you all for your work, and yes.
Just very quickly, please. We just released a report on how solitary confinement is used in the immigration context in New Jersey facilities. So I have this executive summary here, and I would like to share if people are interested.
Please do.
Thank you.
Yes.
Senator,
All right.
Senator, one more comment.
One more comment.
So I'd like to take us back to what the commissioner said this morning in his writings. And I just got a text from him that he was in solitary for 60 days. So take a man who's been through 9/11 and everything else that he has in his life, and solitary confinement in less than 60 days had a man that strong contemplating suicide. So if that could happen to him, imagine what's happening to the men and women, not just across our state, but across our country, who are experiencing solitary confinement and don't have that kind of strength that Bernard Carrick was able to muster. So instead of breaking down the box, we've been breaking down people. And it's an honor to be here and to be able to participate. Thank you.
We will keep everyone informed of not only as the legislation moves through Senator Greenstein's committee and through the Assembly, but all of our criminal justice reforms. We will invite you to make comments, to suggestions, and looking forward to working with everyone as we move forward to change the culture of corrections and criminal justice in our society. Thank you very much. Let's have lunch.
Thank you.